Hey guys, and welcome to a new video. So not too long ago, I uploaded my loot from 10 hours of bossing video where I compared 10 different bosses for 1 hour each, and we took like a bird's eye view of the loot and got a nice comparison out of it. Now I know 1 hour of each boss isn't the best because it only gives you a snapshot of what you can get, but it does give you a good idea of what you can expect for commons and experience. Plus it doesn't take a million years for me to finish the video either, so with that, I had a comment on that video suggesting a God Wars 1 versus God Wars 2 video where I compare the two dungeons. And I thought that was actually a cool idea, so I'm going to be taking that type of style of video and doing it for this. So today, we're going to look at both dungeons and do an hour of each boss and see what happens, and we'll compare the experience and the money I make from each of the bosses. And before we jump into anything, I do want to say I am not including Nex in this video, and I won't be including Telos, which is the new boss that is coming to God Wars 2 later this month. The reason for that is, if I don't include those bosses, it's a nice symmetrical comparison between the 4 original God Wars 1 bosses and the original 4 God Wars 2 bosses. Plus, I felt like Nex wasn't really a fair comparison. It is much higher tier PVM compared to the ones we're talking about today, and Telos is the same way. It is higher than these bosses, so I felt like it didn't really fit in the whole feel of this video. But we can always do a comparison with those bosses in a separate video later on. And so without further ado, let's head right into what happened. And I want to take a look at God Wars 1 first, for chronological reasons, and you might as well start with the quintessential starting boss in Runescape, Bandos. It's also known as General Groardor, but that's fucking hard to say, so fuck that. We're gonna call it Bandos for the remaining part of the video. And like I said, this is a really easy boss. There isn't much mechanics there that you have to worry about. And I was using a Drygor melee setup. I could have used Scythe. Scythe is much better, I feel like, because then you can kill the minions as well. But I don't know, I just was using Drygors in this hour. But don't worry if you don't have that gear, you can do Bandos and most of these other bosses with less gear than that. But if you want to get into these bosses, I will have guides in the description that I have made for some of these bosses. And maybe if I make more in the future, I will update that list. So yeah, either way, enough with the tangents. As for what happened during this hour of Bandos, I got a Bandos glove drop and a Bandos war shield drop. And I remember when the gloves were like 2 mil, definitely not the case anymore. They're like 270k, and the War Shield is now like 100k. So I didn't really get much from rare drops, like only 400k. Hopefully the commons were pretty nice to me, but you do get a lot of coins from God Wars 1, and you also get the Org Bones from the boss itself. But yeah, on to the next boss. This is the Armadil boss, also known as Kree Ora, I think is how you say it. But as for this one, very early into the trip, I got an Armadil hilt, which I think is like 1.3 mil now, so a lot less than it used to be. But I don't really care. 1.3 mil, especially that early in the trip, was a nice chunk of change. And the thing with God Wars 1 is they're all really relaxing, so if you get anything, it is, you know, kind of a surprise because it's so laid back. But that's pretty much all that happened during this hour of Arma. And for the third God Wars 1 boss, we were at Saradomin, also known as Commander Zilliana. And this was the God Wars 1 boss that was very, very lame, stagnant, if that's the correct word. Nothing actually happened during this hour. I will tell you that right now. Absolutely nothing happened. I did get a decent amount of kills per hour, I felt, but it was extremely uneventful. And if you are wondering, I do have the Bandos pet and the Sarah pet already, so it wasn't like I was hoping for those anyway, but I still don't have the Arma nor the Zami pets. And speaking of Zamorak, here we are with the last God Wars 1 boss. And this is also known as Kirill Chutsirath. Really weird name. But I really enjoyed this one. Honestly, in my opinion, I think out of the 4 God Wars, this is my favorite to do. It is really easy, yet really rewarding. The commons from Zamorak, I think, are the best from the original God Wars. I could be wrong, but it just felt that way, especially when you're getting the wines of Zamorak all the time, and they're like 8k. But as for what happened in this hour, I got a Zamorak hilt on the first kill, which was pretty crazy, not gonna lie. I was not expecting that whatsoever. And then a little bit later in the trip, I got a Ward of Subjugation, which actually beamed, which I wasn't aware that it was more than 300k, but apparently the wards of subjugation are a mil each. So it's nice to get something, you know, worth a mil now, and I'm pretty sure that's because of invention, because there are good perks that you can get from Zamorak components. So it kind of makes sense that the ward would go up. And then towards the end of the trip, I snagged an effigy, which I was quite happy about because, free farming experience. So yeah, that was the original 4 God Wars bosses. I felt I got decently lucky. Looking at this was 4 hours of PVMing, and I got 5 God Wars bosses drops, which, some of them are trash, but I can't complain. It's still nice to get a drop, right? But yeah, now that we're done with God Wars 1, let's look at the God Wars 2 bosses, which I have made several videos on already, so it's not going to be super new to you guys, hopefully. And we're going to start with Vindicta, which is my favorite of the God Wars 2 bosses. And during this hour, I didn't have the best kill rate. I think I got 3 less than I did on the 10 hours video, but the hour still went pretty smoothly. I didn't get any rare drops though, so there isn't really anything to talk about. And I've talked about, Vindicta enough. I don't really need to go too much into detail. So let's move on to Gregorovich. Buckle up, guys. Shit went down during this one. So as you may know, Gregorovich can drop the Shadowglaive weapons, which are main hand and offhand ranged weapons that are tier 85. They're kind of like the in-between between Ascensions and Chaotic Crossbows. And I've already gotten one during my loot from 100. I got an offhand back then, and lo and behold, I got another offhand Shadowglaive during this hour, which I did not expect. I'm only doing an hour of each of these bosses, so getting something like this is kind of crazy. And it turns out it's actually 8.7 mil still. I don't know if that's what it'll actually sell for, but that at least is the GE price. And I also got a Sliske Essence, which is 600k. So just from rares, I got 9.3 mil from this boss, and the commons are already spectacular. So, like I said, shit went down. And don't get the wrong idea from this. It's not as if Greg is the all-time best out of this bunch because I got super lucky. This could happen at any of the God Wars. For example, if you went to Saradomin, if the Saradomin hilt is still spendy, you could have gotten that and, made a good chunk of money. This could also happen to the other God Wars 2 bosses as well. So don't look at this video and be like, oh, Greg is the best boss between all of these. I just got really lucky. But with that said, let's move on to the next one, which is Hellwar. And I say this every time, but I just have to get it across. It's my least favorite of the God Wars 2, just because the mechanics are just so annoying. But I did get a Serenic Essence during this hour, and that was about it. Again, like all the other God Wars 2 bosses, the commons are pretty nifty. And then finally, for the last boss, because we've talked long enough, here are the Twin Furies, which are the easiest of God Wars 2, I would say. Especially if you have at least the Dragon Rider Lance. But the Scythe just makes it, terrifyingly easy. And as for what happened during the hour, I'm still dry at Twin Furies. I haven't gotten anything there, but the drops are nice. You get a lot of Wine of Zamaraks, similar to the Zamorak God Wars boss, but just by looking at my numbers, I got twice as many wines as I did in Zamorak. But yeah, that's what happened during the total 8 hours of bossing. And now let's actually compare the bosses side by side and see if we can make any conclusions from this video. So I made these graphics showcasing the experience I gained in that hour and the money I gained in that hour, as well as the kills of each of the bosses. But one thing you do have to notice is that the experience that you get for combat is much better at God Wars 1 than God Wars 2, except Twin Furies. Twin Furies is kind of an exception just because how many kills an hour you can get there. But just look at Zamorak. I got 640k an hour there without any bonus experience, which is insane. Now again, I'm also not the best player at PVM. You could get faster rates than this if you are better at your abilities, but this can give you kind of a good thing to strive for, or at least what you can expect if you're using max gear. So now looking at the money of each of the bosses, the one outlier I would say, other than Gregorovich, because that was fucked anyway, but Saradomin. Saradomin has been very, very bad money, other than its rare drops for a very long time, so it's not really a surprise that I got only 1.4 mil during that hour, but it's kind of sad. That's just not good at all. I would only go to Saradomin if you want the pet, or if you want, very good experience, or if you feel like you could get lucky with Armadillo crossbows and the hilt. As for Bandos and Arma, they're pretty average, I would say. Another thing that I didn't put in here is that how much is commons and how much is rares. If you remember, I got 9 mil from Gregorovich from rare drops. So just in commons, it seems like God Wars 1 is about 2 mil an hour on average without any rare drops. And as for God Wars 2, it's about 3 to 4 mil an hour without any drops. So with that comparison, God Wars 2 usually makes twice as much money per hour as God Wars 1, but God Wars 1 gets roughly twice the experience per hour, with the exception of Twin Furies. So now you can take that information and see what you want. If you want money, God Wars 2 all the way. If you want very good combat experience, God Wars 1 all the way. But it's not like God Wars 2 is terrible experience by any means. You're making good money. You might as well do God Wars 2 when going for experience, because then you're going to make a ton of money on the way. But in my opinion, all of these bosses are worth doing for the pets. So now I guess you have like more information on what you can expect for each of them. So I know this video was extremely long, but I hope it was informative while being entertaining for you. But either way, if you have any more comparison ideas for me to do, I could do a wide range of things with this type of video. And if you want to see anything like that, put that down in the comments. I'd love to read them. But I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good day.